Hey everybody, welcome to part 7 in object-oriented programming in Apex. I'm really excited for this video. This is one of the ones kind of I wanted to make since I started doing this. So we are going to, well, you can see from the title, right? We're going to talk about inheritance and we're going to talk about trigger handlers. I think still in the industry, there's a lot of confusion about what a really good trigger looks like or actually doesn't look like. When we talk about, the best practice of one trigger per object, that triggers should be logicless. So today we're going to build on everything we've done in all of these object-oriented programming videos, and we are going to, especially with inheritance, and we're going to show how we use inheritance to build a true trigger handler framework in Apex. I hesitate to even use the word framework. It's kind of a buzzword, but maybe I guess it is. So first, I'm going to say before I even get started coding, so first of all, please code along with me, and I'm going to give you some, assignments if you want to practice this on your own. But if you're looking for something to actually implement in your own org, so all I'm doing today is really kind of a stripped, dumbed down version of Kevin O'Hara's really excellent trigger framework. I've got it right here on GitHub for you. I think this is a really well-known one in the industry. It is lightweight. It is easy to understand. It has stood the test of time. So take a look at this on GitHub. If you're looking for something for your own org, your own business, your own clients, I think this is an excellent one. All I'm really doing today is a simplified version of this, so we can just kind of see what's happening and how inheritance works. So that said, I'm going to get us back to Illuminated Cloud. And what I wanted to do, so we're going to start this. So unlike most of the videos, I did do a little bit of pre-work. I wanted to kind of do a tribute or build on David Liu's, like his very Apex for people who've never coded before, and you do this hello world trigger. That was the first line of Apex I ever wrote. I was so excited. I think I went out and put Apex on my resume the next day and totally embarrassed myself at a interview another day later, because this is all I knew how to do, and I didn't even really understand how to do this. But anyway, this is what it is, right? It's just a hello world trigger, right? Did it on the lead object. First name equals hello, last name equals world. That's it. That is what David did in the Apex Academy. Now, I'm assuming if you're watching this one, you are not an absolute beginner, right? So we're ready to take this to the next level. We're going to get this out of our trigger. We're going to create a trigger handler class, and then we are going to put this lead logic in its own, I don't know what we'll call it yet, a hello world class or something. So first, I wrote this trigger. Let's just make sure it runs, right? So I wrote a quick test, right? Lead L, enterprise, first name, last name, James Kirk, insert lead. We're going to get the updated lead, and then we're going to assert that, right, hello world, that name did indeed change. So let's run it. Should pass. It passes. All right, now let's get rid of this. We're going to delete that. Recompile. And we're going to run our test again, and our test should fail. And that's what we want. And this should fail until we have finished everything. So we're going to do a little bit of test-driven development here. All right, so what do we got? We got a lead trigger. We got a test class. So I guess the first thing we need to do, we need to write a trigger handler class. So let's just new Apex class. I'm going to call it trigger handler. All right, and we want this to be a virtual class. Remember, virtual lets us subclass it, right? And other classes can inherit. So one of the things we're going to need to know is what context is our trigger running in. So I'm going to make this I think it's what? Trigger operation. I think it's context. Why can't I spell either today, huh? Context. All right, let's write a constructor. Public trigger handler. Okay. And then let's just say this.context equals, and I cannot, is it trigger operation? What is it? I forgot. Trigger operation type, right? Thank you so much. Code completion. I'm just going to compile that. And if you're wondering, right, this is why a good editor makes you a faster developer. So thank you, Illuminated Cloud, for saving me there. Okay, so in fact, and we're just going to put a debug statement in, system.debug, so we'll get this back. And we're going to just say the context is. And we'll just context. Okay. And then, so this way we should just be able, so these are, I'm going to switch over to the trigger, Apex trigger documentation. Just a reminder, there are static variables, right, on the trigger class that you can call. So you can get, that's why we know if it's, so the, trigger.new map is execute, right? All of these are part of the trigger class. So when we work with a trigger on lead, a trigger on account, right? It inherits this stuff from the trigger class. So that's why we can access it in our handler. We're going to pass it in. So, all right. So now what we need is, we'll call it a run method. Public void run. All right. And so what we want to do is we're going to do a switch statement. Switch on, I'm going to say this.context. And my typing always gets so much worse when I start making a video. I'm going to say when. I'll say before update. And we're just going to leave that one blank. And then when we'll say before update. What else do we want to do? Before insert. That should have really come first, right? We should have done before insert, before update. So when you're doing this later and you're fixing my garbage code, right? Maybe you should take care of that. And then we're just going to say when after insert. So all I'm doing here, right, is I'm creating a switch statement, and I'm only going to switch on 3 of the trigger contexts because I want this video to be it's already going to be, 20, 30 minute video. So we're going to try to keep it short. So I would say for your own practice later on, take this and work through the other trigger context variables, right? After undelete, after update, all of the other context variables. We're only going to do before update, before insert, and after insert. Then we're going to say before update, and then it's red because I haven't actually written these methods yet. For insert, and then what? After insert. All right. So now we've got 3 methods. Well, actually, we don't have methods. We've called methods, but we have not declared them. So we are going to do protected, and look up the protected. If you're not familiar with that access modifier, right, it's just going to let all the subclasses access it. We're going to say protected virtual void before update. So what we're going to do here, we are going to write some methods, and we're not going to have anything in them because all we really want is our actual classes that extend trigger handler to be able to override these. Remember, and put the logic in them that they want. All right, so we are gonna, like, I'm just gonna boom, boom, real quick. Before update, before insert, and after insert. Okay, so we have got everything we need. Let's put, I'm going to just put debug statements in these. Superclass before update. Debug in superclass before insert. And I'm going to, I'm going to close my test window out here, give a little more real estate on the screen. Hopefully that helps everybody see this a little better. System.debug and in superclass after insert. Okay. So there we go. We have got a basic, very basic trigger handler framework, right? So we have got, let's just talk through it real quick what we have. We have a virtual class. We have this variable here, right, to get our trigger context. And we are going, because we can inherit that from the trigger class, from trigger operations. So we're going to set that in the constructor. Then we have a run method. And the run method is going to switch on context. So saying, hey, if the context is before update, call the before update method. If it's before, if context is before insert, right, call the before insert method. And so forth. But down here, right, we have these three virtual methods. And for this, there's nothing in them because all I really want is my subclasses to be able to inherit the run method, to be able to inherit these, and then override the trigger. So these methods, right, designed to be specific to a particular trigger context. So I want my subclasses to be able to override these, and I want my lead trigger, I want my account trigger, I want, my operative, whatever you got, right? I want it to be able to implement the logic it wants when it's a lead before update, and so on and so forth. So let's, I'm going to compile this. I guess that would be our logical next step. Compile. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to make another class and extend this, right? So we have trigger handler, but what we want to do is we want to work on the lead object, right? So I'm going to call this lead trigger handler. And we are going to extend trigger handler. And then we want to override some of our, we are going to override in this one because we are just going to do before insert and before update. So as you can see, so I'm using Illuminated Cloud, I'm using IntelliJ, and these are some of the bells and whistles that it will do some of this boilerplate for me. So that's what's going on here. But it's saying here are the classes that are available to you in Trigger Handler for you to override. Before insert, before update, and after insert. We're not even going to touch, I don't think we're going to do before, because we're not going to do before update today. We're just going to do before insert and after insert. Okay, so we're going to override those. And in this one, we're just going to say system.debug handler for insert. And you know what's going to be important here. All right, so because we are going to, this is a lead trigger handler, right? So we need, when you use trigger.new, or when because we're using through inheritance, trigger.new, trigger.old map, new map, trigger.old, right? We're going to get a list of S objects back. So we need to cast those S objects to leads. So I'm going to say for this one, all I want is a list lead. I'm going to say, I'm just going to call it new list. And we're going to create a constructor. And I'm just going to do, so if you read the README, right, and Kevin O'Hara's trigger framework, this is basically what he's going to tell you to do. I think, not basically, it's what he tells you to do, right? So we are going to public lead trigger handler. And we're going to say this dot new list equals, first I'm just going to do this, I'm going to make my editor mad at me. Trigger.new. All right. And let's see. I feel like that shouldn't even compile. I feel like I should get an error back when I try to do that. Well, because what I actually want, I want to make sure these are a list of leads. So maybe I'm making a mistake already, because we want to make sure, because trigger.new returns an S object. But if you remember, like inheritance, right? Lead is a subclass of S object. So lead inherits from S object. Account inherits from S object. So we can say trigger.new, it's an S object, but we want it to cast it. So trigger.new returns a list of S objects. We're going to cast it to a list of leads in this case, right? And then we have our before insert. And we are, let's say, first of all, we're just going to, I'm going to put a debug statement in here. In lead handler before insert. All right, and now let's go back to our lead trigger. All right. And all we're going to put in our trigger is, I'm going to say trigger handler equals new lead trigger handler. All right. So you see, right, because lead trigger handler extends trigger handler, we can assign it to that. And then I'm going to say handler.run. And this is all I like to have in a trigger. What you see here, right, these two lines. Trigger handler equals new, whatever kind of trigger handler it is, handler.run. That's it. In my opinion, nothing else ever goes inside a trigger but those two lines. But you have to understand inheritance to make this work. All right, so let's go and let's just run our lead test, which should still fail because there's nothing doing that logic. But we're just going to run it so we can look at what we get in our debug logs. All right. Run. Make sure I compile that because I expected something in my debug logs. Run it again. There we go. Okay, so if you remember, right, so we're just doing a little bit of a sanity check here. So we have the context is before insert. And if you recall, right, we put that in our handler, right? So we could just make sure the context was what it was. Then you can see the lead handler before insert. So we went into, because we called run, we went into the lead handler before insert method. Then, so because we did insert a lead, right, we have to expect we are going to get an after insert trigger context. So that happened for us. Context is after insert. And then we went back into the lead trigger handler where, of course, I gave both of them the exact same debug statement because I apparently just make, those are the kind of videos I make. Thanks for bearing with me. All right. So let's wrap this up. All right. So the next thing we need, because we still, in my opinion, like I don't put logic in my trigger handlers, right? So we want a class. I'm going to say I want my Apex class and lead. I'm going to call it the lead hello worlder. All right. And you know what? I think for this one, do we want to do a static method? Do we want to actually instantiate a new class? I'm going to say, you know what? We're going to do full-blown, not license exception, right? We're just going to create a class. Lead, new list. And then we're going to say public lead hello worlder. And it's going to get a list lead new list. All right, it's going to take that as a parameter. And it's going to say, it's going to assign that this.new list equals new list. And then we're going to say hello world. I'm going to call the say hello world method directly from the constructor. Void say hello world. And then, right, we're going to need a for loop. For lead L in new list. L dot first name equals hello. And because this is before, stupid single and double quotes. So I've been playing around with Python, and almost every other language I work with uses double quotes are my preferred thing. So then I go to Apex and I goof it up all the time. L dot last name. And I did it again, didn't I? I know you're all like, nice tutorial, Brooks. You can't even keep your quotation marks straight, right? Hello world. And that's it, right? Because it's a before trigger. So we don't need any DML. We don't need anything like that. It's just going to set those field values for us. And get rid of these extra lines. Then let's call this super, let's compile it. And yes, yes, yes. Let's go back to our lead trigger handler. Lead hello worlder. Hello equals new. Lead hello worlder, and we're gonna pass it this dot new list. We're gonna give it the value from trigger.new, right? So this should work. Let's compile it. So we're gonna call hello. So we're trigger handler. So let's just walk through. You know what? First, let's just run it. Let's see if our test passes, and then we'll walk through it. If it fails, I'm not going to walk it through. Hey, it passed. Check that out. All right. I should be that excited that I wrote some hello world code and it passed, right? But I still feel that way every time something passes on the first time. All right. So our test passed. Lead, it did indeed. Hello world. Okay. So let's talk through everything we just did, start to finish. All right. So we have a lead, trigger lead on lead. All right. And inside lead, this is it. This is all of the logic that should ever go inside your trigger. Trigger handler, some variation of this. And handler.run, right? That's it. The more your trigger, in my opinion, gets like if before insert, after update, and then like it gets hard to test. So that's it. Enough said. This is what goes inside a trigger. That's it. Some variation of this. Then we have our superclass. Remember, it has to be virtual. Virtual lets us inherit. It lets us extend it. We have one variable there, the context. We set that in our constructor, right? And then we call the run method, if you remember, in the trigger handler. And I just wrote a couple lines of a switch statement. So, right, if context is before update, etc., etc., call the appropriate method. These methods are also all virtual, right? So they can all be overridden by these subclasses. So lead trigger handler extends trigger handler. It's going to take the value from trigger.new, convert it to a list of leads. It overrides before insert and after insert to put its own logic into them. And in before insert, right, it calls the lead hello world or class, right? So I do want to say, in larger, more sophisticated orgs, sometimes your trigger handlers can still get big, right, as different methods are being called out of these. So it still can take some thought and some design. But this is, right, so we're just going to call the class because we want, the more we have things in their own classes, the more it makes it easy to test that one specific piece of logic, right? And so we instantiate the class, pass it the value from trigger.new, and this class just does exactly pretty much what David Liu did in Apex coding for absolute beginners, which is, again, like where I started. But if you're watching this, you are probably no longer an absolute beginner. But that's it, right? So think of this as this is maybe the most advanced hello world ever. I don't know, right? So we used inheritance, and we did a lot of stuff to do hello world. I really hope this helps, though. I hope it makes everybody understand one trigger per object, trigger handlers, what this means when people talk about that, and best practices. If you want, so again, if you're looking for this for your own org, I highly recommend just take Kevin O'Hara's absolutely excellent trigger framework. If you want to play with this a little bit on your own to get a better understanding, right, I would suggest, right, we implement the rest of your trigger context methods. Maybe do something different, do it on account, opportunity, a custom object, whatever you got, right? And continue to flesh these out and override it and make it your own, because that's how you learn. Hope this was a good video. Hope this helped. If it did and you made it this far, please take a second and subscribe and, pardon me, sorry, click that like button, and I'll see you in the next one, where we'll probably finally talk about abstract classes. Take care, everybody.